right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. For the Caribbean people, I know you had no choice. But thank you very much for joining us. I kid. This morning, we're going to very quickly, I'm sharing this presentation with Judith, my colleague from the OECS, who will introduce herself. I'm going to very quickly run through with you where we are in terms of offshore wind exploration in the Caribbean across a couple of countries, and where we hope to go and what role there is for various players within the field, whether it's within the area of pre-feasibility, exploration, developers, innovators, etc. All right, so my name is Kiesha Farnum. I'm the head of partnerships and programs with the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCREEE. And for those of you who may not be familiar with CARICOM, I want you to think of what the EU does for European countries and then translate that to what CARICOM does for Caribbean countries. So there are member states, there are 21 member states, and CARICOM has a number of agencies that look after specific areas. So we are the ones that are responsible for renewable energy. There's one responsible for health. There's one responsible for climate change, which is 5 Cs. And we all work together collaboratively, but we work across multiple countries. And if I had to say who was our major client is our government, right? So there's been a lot that's been happening across the region, and I have to say, we were in the Canary Islands before we came here, and the conversations that we've been having, I think, first of all, we're way ahead than where we thought we were. And I think whenever we talk about the energy transition in the region, we tend to use the rhetoric that we're not moving fast enough, we're far behind, and we do know that we're vulnerable. I won't go into that. We all know the challenges. I also won't go into that in detail as island nations. But I think having the experience of other island nations and seeing where they are, I realize that we're on the right trajectory and we're actually a lot further ahead than we think we are, particularly because of our size. And so when you look at some of the islands, and this is just a snapshot, there's a lot of other things that are happening. In Bermuda, there's the Sandbox Initiative, which is basically a regulatory framework in which they amended the Electricity Act in order to be able to allow for new, bright and shiny, innovative technology to test in Bermudan waters. There's ocean thermal energy conversion work that's happening in Martinique and Guadeloupe. In Barbados, the Electric and Power Act in 2013 was also amended, and through funding from the Inter-American Development Bank, a roadmap was developed, a marine spatial plan is currently being developed, and a baseline environmental assessments are also being done to be able to aid offshore renewables or the implementation of offshore renewables. In Trinidad and Tobago, the Gulf of Paria is being seen as an offshore wind zone. And so it really is the perfect site for fixed bottom offshore wind projects. And exploration is happening in that area in terms of pre-feasibility studies. And then, for example, in Suriname, which is considered Caribbean, but it's actually on the Latin American continent, Suriname's nearshore zone offers strong wind and grid potential. All right, so a step in the right direction. At CCREEE, we are now leading phase 2 of the Regional Offshore Wind Strategy and Roadmap, so ROSA, to unlock the Caribbean's offshore wind potential. This project was funded by FCDO to the tune of £500,000, and this initiative looks at the resource assessments, the feasibility studies, and the investment case study. So what it would take in order to post-feasibility invest in offshore wind in the Caribbean. This is the second phase, so the first phase would have been completed already, and the second phase is due to end at the end of this year. So this is actually a great inflection point for us to be here. We're at inception point in terms of going to the next phase, getting investors, bringing new technology to the region with a cadre of information that would be useful for those who would be interested in the region. In terms of the Caribbean, the rhetoric is now going around that we are not small island developing states, but rather we are big ocean states. And so the realization that we have exclusive economic zones that can really house really robust offshore wind and wave and tidal energy solutions, particularly for the wave and the tidal. It's quite new. We're in talks about how we can start exploration in those areas, and we know that those will provide a great base load for the Caribbean, because the waves are always going, the tide is always coming, right? So in terms of things that we've been looking at, infrastructure readiness gaps, regulatory and permitting uncertainty, supply chain and capacity constraints, climate and geophysical hazards, and of course capital mobilization and bankability. I think one of the things, and we knew it, but I think seeing the magnitude and the scale of some of the offshore wind solutions, we really have to be very cognizant as we take on new technology as to what that is going to look like coming into a Caribbean port, and what is the port readiness. It's not on this slide, but we're also working with the Caribbean Port Association, and we're again in early stage discussions, but looking at how we can enhance port infrastructure and greening port infrastructure as well, which would fall within the framework of how we are prepared to undertake this type of technology. In terms of phase one, what we did, so we conducted regional geospatial analysis. We would have assessed the full 21 member countries, BMC's borrowing member countries, for offshore wind suitability. We would have identified over 7,000 square kilometers suitable for fixed or grounded founded offshore wind, and 865 square kilometers for floating offshore wind. And then we shortlisted a number of countries, so Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Jamaica, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago, and looking at the spatial corridors with strong wind resource, grid proximity, environmental feasibility, and scale. That's how we came up with moving forward to phase two with those countries. A large part of it was also political will. I think the one thing that I've also been hearing from a lot of investors and developers is that you can have the technology, you can have all the things, but if the regulatory framework and the enabling environment doesn't exist, you have to go to multiple people to get your permits, you have to run around, governments change, the priorities change, it can really stymie the progress of projects. And so the countries that we also chose were countries that had signaled that they had readiness, and that readiness was also in their renewable energy plans, all right? So from strategy to bankability, our phase two, we're looking at investment grade preparation. So this is being funded by, again, FCDO, but it's also being supported by the Inter-American Development Bank and the Caribbean Development Bank, which are two of the major multilateral development banks that are players within the region. And they're advancing 3 to 5 sites for investment grade status through wind and metocean validation, feasibility studies, the technical, the economic, and the environment. The permitting roadmap development, I just mentioned how important that is, and then the stakeholder engagement and governance strengthening. And so the deliverable at the end of Q4 2025, which is the end of this year, is the investment prospectus and one lighthouse project. So from of those 4 countries that I had listed before, we're going to choose one country to move forward in terms of developing an investment prospectus and having a lighthouse project between 50 to 100 megawatt. And then why partner with us and why now? So there is opportunities, as I mentioned before, for developers, investors, tech providers. Early movers have the advantage of being in an emerging market that is donor-backed. So as I mentioned, we have the IDB, we have the CDB, we have World Bank now, and I know we're in discussions with the EU, who through their patronage, we've been able to be here. And so we're also discussing with the EU what it would look like to create a regulatory sandbox, not just for one Caribbean country, but across a number of countries, that can be that kind of one-stop shop for developers. Pre-screen sites with validated potential de-risk parameters. And I need to say that the EU has not committed. We're in talks. So I'm not publicly committing you, but we're definitely very excited about the potential there. Multiple country collaboration. So you have the opportunity for generation, transmission, green fuel production, and then estimated 3 to 5 billion plus infrastructure market through to 2035. So ports, generations, logistics, etc. In terms of the governance platform, it is CCREEE-led with a public steering committee that currently has CARICOM, FCDO, IDB, and CDB on board. I'm going to give my colleague now, Judith, the opportunity to talk about the OECS as a region.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Judith Ephraim Schmidt, and I am the Program Director for Energy at the OECS Commission. And as Kiesha has explained to you, the Caribbean is a wonderful place for energy. And now we're looking at how we can incorporate sustainable energy. I was looking to see if I could go back. Apparently I can't. Oh, yes. So just as we zoom in on the Caribbean, just wanted to highlight it to those who are not too aware with the Eastern Caribbean. So it is this chain of islands stretching from St. Martin down to Grenada. We're interested in that we have a combination of 6 independent member states, but we also have 3 French departments, so that's part of the EU as well, and 3 overseas territories. But these islands share a common bond in that they are very similar in size and in some conditions. We also have a bit of a single economic space, which makes doing business relatively easier in terms of regulatory environments, in terms of monetary conditions, etc. But now I just want to indicate that there is heightened interest for energy in the OECS. And we have, as Kiesha indicated, a very strong level of high-level political support. But the environment in general is becoming more conducive. We have more capacity. We have more recognition amongst other stakeholders. So there's a strong thrust towards embracing sustainable energy. The oceans have always been part of our lives. And now, apart from tourism, apart from fisheries, apart from the biodiversity, the marine space in terms of renewables opens up a whole new dimension to the way that we use our oceans. So just want to highlight our OECS Sustainable Energy Framework, which is our cooperation mechanism as the OECS. And the vision is really that clean and indigenous energy transforms and drives development in the OECS. We have 8 priority areas, but I want to highlight renewable energy, which includes marine renewables, sustainable energy for economic growth and development. The blue economy has become one of the drivers of our economic space at the moment, so there's a lot of interest in here. And so we see a good opportunity for us to marry those two. In terms of what is happening within the marine space, the OECS is very well equipped when it comes to energy and ocean policy. So in 2013, we began work and adopted our Eastern Caribbean Regional Ocean Policy. And in the context of SIDS, this is actually a leading piece of work on the global level. We also have a strategic action plan which supports this ocean policy. And coming from this, we have integrated coastal and marine spatial plans which offer a 15-year time frame to support the transition towards the blue economy through sustainable development. So at the regional level, we have a coastal plan, but we also have 5 spatial plans for some of our member states, and we're working on increasing this. We have a very strong emphasis on the green-blue economy for the OECS, and what we are trying to do is to really promote responsible management for its coastal, marine, and terrestrial ecological resources. We see a need for there to be a strong synchronization between our energy and ocean policy. And I just wanted to highlight what you see on the right side of the screen. This year at our Council of Ministers, the third Council of Ministers on Energy, the OECS Ministers for Energy would have signed the Bastet Declaration, which has identified 2025 to 2035 as the OECS Decade of Action on Sustainable Energy. As we would have heard, we are small island states, but we are large marine states. And it has been estimated that subject to delimitation of our maritime boundaries, our space in terms of the oceans is about 85 times the combined land area. And you can already see based on the figures as far back as 2012, that the oceans really represent a significant part of our economy, representing as much as 14% of our GDP, the Caribbean Sea. So we really need to strengthen the capacity of the region to tap into the marine renewable space and to bring together the ocean and the energy stakeholders together to develop an even stronger and more resilient economic space for the region. Some of the opportunities that we have been exploring, and based on the work that we have done within the ocean space, we actually had in 2020 a blue investment portfolio, which has put out a number of projects that are ready for investment in the OECS. And I've just highlighted some of those that are being proposed under the marine renewable space. The first is to conduct a market analysis for offshore energy for the OECS that identifies areas of high value for concentration in terms of efforts, looking at how we can identify the best technologies for our space. This one is at a national level, but looking at a transnational initiative, conduct a feasibility study for regional offshore wind project. We recognize as some of the smallest islands in the Caribbean the need for us to bundle projects, the need for us to look at pool procurement, and we see this as good opportunities for us to leverage this, looking at economies of scales and other advantages from the pooling. To develop an OECS Marine Energy Action Plan and Strategy, establish an OECS regional platform that promotes research, innovation, and governance in the area of the blue economy and sustainable energy. We want to also move from just the research and doing the analysis to actually implementing pilot projects on solar, wind, and ocean energy and hybrid technologies that support blue tourism, fisheries, and marine transportation. And if you look at the left side of the screen, the right side of the screen, this is a ferry that is powered by solar in Grenada. We hope that we will have a little more of those, bringing together again energy and the marine space for better use of what we have available to us. We need to really look at seawater cooling, particularly for our hotels, which represent a major economic driver for us, but our energy costs are kind of limiting our competitiveness of that industry and other industries that require a high level of energy for operations. And of course, conduct a feasibility study in each OECS member states that gives us a short list of each of the countries' suitable sites for OTEC, for wave and offshore wind, and of course looking at the other considerations within the marine space, like the biophysical, the ecological and infrastructural considerations that need to be taken on board. We don't have a lot of data, but we have started the work, and it's important that we get those data so that our political directorate can make informed decisions, so that when we meet with investors, we have everything laid out in terms of what are our considerations, what are our priorities, where we may be able to give and take. In terms of ongoing work, we have started some work in this area. We're having this group here who have been privileged to see firsthand through the support of the EU delegation and the expertise France. We've had a number of opportunities to cooperate with the EU and other partners in that regard, but we think we need to take this to another level where we have more concrete actions, where we develop a plan so that we can move forward. One of the initiatives we have been looking at that could be tied to marine renewables is the whole issue of interconnection. As you would see through the chain of islands, our scale limits us to some extent, but where there's an opportunity for us to interconnect and to make our energy infrastructure more resilient, where there's excess in some countries that can be exported to other countries and allow for us to have a stronger regional market, we see an opportunity for us to do this. So looking here, listening to the considerations for cabling, undersea cabling, and for connections, we think that there is more work that needs to be done there. We've also been looking at including tourism, which is a vital part of our economy. We have been looking at shore powers and recognizing shore power opportunities and recognizing that now ships have an obligation to use clean energy. We want to see how we as a Caribbean can use the opportunities provided by our green power and by our marine renewables to power ships and help generate a new source of income for us and really to advance our renewable energies on island. So these are some of the opportunities that are currently being closely considered. In terms of the investment framework, we think that the OECS is particularly well positioned to support investment in marine renewables. As I said, we have a very well articulated ocean policy, our ECROP. We have a well articulated sustainable energy vision. And so we're looking for partnerships across the board for private sector investment, for venture capitalists, for grants. We're looking at research. The list goes on. So we closely ask that if you would have a look at what we have to offer. You can meet up with us at any point. We have a number of our member states here, and through the expertise France and the EU, they can facilitate continued discussion and dialogue. And that's it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will do our best to answer, if not now, at a later date. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.